blue state energy prices are higher. Trump not surprised by a coalition of Democratic AGs. Housing woes continue despite billions of tax dollars spent. Today's primary elections, education news, and more. Welcome to The States, powered by the Center Square. It's Tuesday, August 18th, 2026. I'm your host, Greg Bishop. President Donald Trump says he'll declare the Strait of Hormuz a U.S. territory, but no federal agency has said what controlling the key oil checkpoint would cost taxpayers. On Friday, Trump said after the U.S. defeats Iran, he'll declare the Hormuz Strait a territory of the United States. Now, the strait is at least the fifth foreign territory that Trump has proposed bringing under U.S. control after Greenland, the Panama Canal, Canada, and several others. Now, the strait is not for sale. It runs through Iranian and Omani territorial waters, and neither country is offering to hand it over. Iran rejects the idea outright. Its judiciary chief called Trump's claim a product of delusions and said that Iran is the owner and ruler of the waterway. What it would come to with if we do control that is the open-ended cost of military presence in that area. The Center Square's Brett Rowland asked U.S. Central Command, the Department of War, and the White House what controlling the strait would cost. No figures were provided. The command referred to the question to the Department of War, which pointed to Secretary of War Pete Hegseth's congressional testimony from May. Now, in that testimony, Hegseth did not give a cost for the blockade for controlling that strait. Now, the question of who pays to keep the strait open, it's not new. During the 1980s tanker war, the U.S. Navy escorted oil tankers through the Gulf and fought Iranian forces in the largest naval surface battle since World War II. Some members of Congress then and now, they pressed for allies who relied on the strait to help cover those costs. 40 years later, the cost of the current operation remains unstated. But Americans are feeling the price of the ongoing conflict beyond the cost of the military. They're feeling it at the pump. AAA has the regular fuel price average at $4.06 a gallon today. Last week, it was at $4.01 a gallon. A year ago, it was at $3.13 a gallon. Now, the Center Square reported last month that gas prices are higher on average in blue states than in red states due to decades of policy choices in those states. That's not the only energy source that's more expensive in blue states than in red states. Energy prices are higher on average in blue states than they are in red states because of energy policies that prioritize renewable resources, such as wind and solar, over reliability and affordability. That's according to two energy groups in a joint report and website released. Now, joining us to discuss this further is Isaac Orr, co-founder and vice president of research for Always On Energy Research. Thanks for taking time with us, Isaac. So tell us what this report shows.
Absolutely. So our report shows that on average, blue states, so those that voted for the Democratic presidential candidate in each of the last two presidential elections, have significantly higher electricity prices than those that voted for the Republican candidate.
Driving this? Is it just somebody votes Democrat and then all of a sudden the prices are higher in that state and somebody votes Republican and the prices are lower? Is it that simple, or what's really behind the driving forces there?
Yeah, absolutely, Greg. It is a policy issue. So the Democratic states tend to enact policies like renewable energy mandates that drive up the cost of electricity because it forces you to buy more wind and solar than the market would otherwise kind of dictate. They also tend to obstruct natural gas infrastructure and prevent the construction of natural gas pipelines and power plants that are needed to maintain reliability on the system. And that's one of the reasons why you've seen such a high increase in the capacity prices in PJM. These states like Virginia require the coal plants to get shut down. They kind of hinder the ability to build new natural gas. And we wonder why we have soaring electricity prices in the northeastern United States. They also have policies like taxes on carbon dioxide or prices on CO2. So ultimately, the blue states tend to layer on 4 or 5 different policies that are all inflationary when it comes to electricity prices that red states just don't do. And that's why we see this giant divergence in the cost of electricity for blue states and red states.
Isaac, I'm in the state of Illinois, and covering the Illinois State House, I watched years ago, like 6 years ago, all the talk about reliable resources versus renewable resources, and the state decided to go towards putting a a date certain of when coal-fired power plants were supposed to no longer operate, and natural gas-fired power plants. We were told that this was going to make things more reliable, that this was going to lower costs for everyday Illinois families. How's Illinois looking? And are these policies they put in place helping?
Illinois is above the national average, and frankly, Illinois benefits from the fact that it has a large fleet of existing nuclear power plants. But the regulations that Illinois has recently enacted are going to increase the cost of electricity there. They're requiring more wind, more solar, more battery storage, and they're going to force all of the coal-fired power plants and gas-fired power plants to be off the grid by, I believe it's 2045, unless that gets changed. And that's also another interesting thing that we've noticed in our report, Greg, is the blue states with the high rates have recently, now that affordability is an issue, started to walk back or rescind or water down a lot of the policies that have driven up the cost of electricity in the first place. We've seen it in New York, we see it in Connecticut, Delaware, Massachusetts is reconsidering it, or their mandates as well. So I think that there is a growing understanding that a lot of the energy policies that got enacted during the first Trump administration are having a really big negative impact on the states that did that, and they're reconsidering those mandates right now.
And we'll see just how that does in the long run here. Isaac, let's talk a little bit about some of the highest energy rates that you guys have listed in your report. Hawaii, obviously, in the middle of the ocean, it's got a pretty high energy rate there. But talk about like California and Connecticut and Rhode Island and Massachusetts. Are they all on the same page with their policies that seem to be increasing the price of energy for everyday families and businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. They are. You give Hawaii a pass because they're so dependent on imports from, the mainland, but all the rest of those states that you just mentioned, basically California and New England, they restrict natural gas. They have renewable energy mandates. They have prices on carbon dioxide. And generally it's just difficult to build things in those states in the first place. So the states with some of the highest mandates for wind and solar actually end up having not very much wind and solar built in their areas because, when you look at California, they've been trying to build this train, this high-speed rail for over a decade. And I think they're going to get like 20 miles built at some point in the future. And it's cost them billions of dollars. So it's kind of this symptom that we see when it comes to other aspects of the economy, like housing. There's all this red tape and it prevents the new supply from coming online. So we see a lot of that, but there's also kind of this like general blue state, I don't know, malaise is the right word, where you see a lot of, companies, businesses moving to areas with, lower taxes, less restrictive operating climates. So that manifests itself in the energy prices as well.
No question, especially as you see, hot summer months and there's more energy usage there, the push for more electric vehicle purchases, more energy use there, this ongoing push for, data centers and artificial intelligence, and all of that's going to take some energy. So when you look at these charts, we just looked at the places with the highest energy rates. You look at those with the lowest energy rates, and again, they're red political leaning. Idaho, Nebraska, Louisiana, Oklahoma, North Dakota. When it comes to these investments from these, industries that are emerging here, like data centers, put the controversy aside across the country of what's going on there, but which states are they more likely to go ahead and invest in?
Oh, it's going to be the red states because they're going to have lower cost power. There's going to be more options to build new natural gas power plants, which I think is going to be the resource that ends up meeting most of the demand for new data centers or, manufacturing. That's a huge part of the demand growth story as well. And those states tend to have more land where people are willing to invest in new technologies. Like North Dakota, for example, there's a bunch of new data centers being planned out there next to the coal facilities. And North Dakota takes a very all of the above approach to energy. And that means keeping their existing coal plants open. So that is going to provide a really big opportunity for those states like North Dakota, Louisiana. I believe Oklahoma and Idaho were on that list as well. they're going to be hubs of innovation and job creation to the extent that the locals want that. And the blue states are going to kind of end up looking even more backward than they kind of do right now.
Isaac, what should policymakers at a state house level, what should they take away from this report?
Well, they should go to bluestateshighrates.com and look at their state profile first and foremost, because that's going to give them the opportunity to see the nuances that are influencing their state policies. But essentially, the more that the legislature tries to intervene and shape the energy policies of their state, you're going to have higher prices that result from that, because you're kind of distorting the natural choices that a market would make. So it's not to say that utilities don't need oversight. They absolutely do. But the more you try to force a square peg into a round hole, you're going to reap the consequences of that. And that's exactly what we see in the states with the highest prices in the country.
Yeah, we're seeing some of the people pushing these policies to cap carbon or to tax, certain types of fossil fuel industries or regulate them to where they close down. We see them saying, hey, it's going to, in the long run, we're going to have cleaner energy. But is that really the case here? Are these renewables really that clean? And is it just going to lead to more costs?
Well, one of the funny things about that, Greg, is that when Virginia rejoined the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is the regional cap and trade program for CO2, that probably made the coal plants in West Virginia more viable from an economic standpoint, because they're going to have more ability to send coal-fired electricity into Virginia. So a lot of times, all of this wind and solar generation, it's going to add some energy to the system. But when the chips are down, you're going to need the coal, natural gas, and nuclear power that's on the grid in order to, maintain reliability during a winter storm Fern or a winter storm, Uri. So this is essentially, the wind and solar is an additional cost on top of an already reliable grid. And what we're seeing is the blue states are now hitting this point to where they're starting to question whether that additional cost that people are actually paying on their bills every month is ultimately worth it.
Now, Isaac, not all blue states fell into that category. Tell us a little bit about North Carolina.
Oh, yeah. North Carolina is interesting. It's the only red state, quote unquote, that we examined that has a 100% carbon free mandate. And that applies to the Duke utilities. So essentially, the large investor owned utilities in the state are required to reduce their carbon dioxide emissions by 2050. And as a result, we've seen that those utilities have seen larger increases in their electricity prices than the co-ops, the rural cooperatives, and the municipal utilities that are operating in the state. So we see that, policy matters. Policy has an influence on prices, and the electricity companies that are the most heavily regulated and forced to adopt these renewable energy mandates, we see higher prices as a result of that. So that's why you've seen in North Carolina, they've decided to roll back some of those interim requirements. So basically, they had a midpoint goal that they were forcing the utilities to reduce their emissions by. They repealed that because they understood that it was going to increase costs.
It's an incredible report. And again, it shows 86% of states with electricity prices above the national average reliably blue leaning politically, while 80% of the 10 states with the lowest electricity reliability are red. Isaac Orr, co-founder and vice president of research for Always On Energy Research. Greatly appreciate your time. And we'll be back with more here on The States.
By Center Square that nearly 24 Democratic attorney generals, months before your reelection, were basically planning already lawsuits against you, and wanted to see what your comment is on that. Second question.
Well, I heard about that. I'm not surprised because they've weaponized this country like never before.
It's President Donald Trump responding to confidential documents obtained by the Center Square, revealing plans to sue him nearly 7 months before he was reelected. Welcome back to the States. I'm Greg Bishop. Trump made those comments at a press briefing Monday, acknowledging investigative reporting by the Center Square. The Center Square's Washington, D.C. bureau chief, Sarah Roderick Fitch, asked the president about that exclusive story.
There was a report by the Center Square that nearly 24 Democratic attorney generals, months before your reelection, were basically planning already lawsuits against you, and wanted to see what your comment is on that. Second question.
Well, I heard about that. I'm not surprised because they've weaponized this country like never before. The Democrats, or the Democrats as I call them, they've weaponized the country like nobody's ever seen anything like it. When you see the reports that are coming out now, that you would have never seen if I had not won the election in a landslide, but you would have never seen it if I didn't win the election. But the reports that you see coming out now and the kind of illegal activity that they used on the 2020 election and beyond is earth-shattering. These are very dishonest people, so I wouldn't be surprised to hear that.
Now, the Center Square investigative reporter Adam Herbets reports state attorneys general have sued the Trump administration approximately 100 times since January 2025. Documents obtained by the Center Square show the coordinated effort appears to have a nickname: the Project for Federal Accountability. Not all the lawsuits have been joined by each attorney general, and some offices take the lead on different cases. But at last count, the total number of cases that have been brought by certain attorneys general, California's Rob Bonta filed at least 82 lawsuits. Colorado Attorney General Phil Weiser, at least 76 lawsuits. Washington State Attorney General Brown, 72 lawsuits, and Attorney General Chris Mays out of Arizona, 49 lawsuits. Now in California, Bonta characterized lawsuits as apolitical, although a confidential document obtained by the Center Square shows only Democratic attorneys general plotted the litigation. Now, the lawsuits have cost California taxpayers in particular $19 million, according to the California Attorney General's office. Have they been successful? Well, so far, here's the status of some of these lawsuits against Trump. 14 cases have been closed in favor of the plaintiff. 4 cases have been dismissed in favor of the federal government. Again, out of 100 cases. Now, the president did not comment on any of the lawsuits specifically. He stated the documents are only being revealed now because he, quote, won the election in a landslide. He said that there are very dishonest people and that he wouldn't be surprised to see that. Now, state attorneys general, they did file 122 multi-state lawsuits against the Biden administration during his 4 years in office, according to data previously collected in 2025 by Marquette University. Now, not all of those were launched by Republicans. 6 of the lawsuits were launched by Democrats, and 2 were bipartisan. Now, when attorneys general have sued prior administrations, Herbets reports it was typically after the administration took action, not before the administration would take action. For example, former Utah Attorney General Mark Shuttleth, he pointed to a 2012 lawsuit challenging the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, after its passage in March of 2010. He was one of 22 Republican attorneys general who signed on to that case, which ended with a partial victory and partial defeat before the U.S. Supreme Court. He also said he votes Democrat, but believes the sheer number of lawsuits on both sides are excessive. You can follow that story and so much more from the investigative team at thecentersquare.com. We'll be right back with more here from the States. typical American has to save for at least a decade to afford a home in their state, despite the federal government spending nearly $500 billion tax dollars on housing programs since 2015. That's according to a new report from Open the Books. Welcome back to the States. I'm Greg Bishop. Joining us to discuss this further is the Center Square reporter, Therese Boudreau. Therese, how much have taxpayers spent on affordable housing, and, well, has it made a difference?
Yeah, well, taxpayers have spent approximately $460 billion from 2015 to 2024, and it hasn't really made a dent. What Open the Books found is that the affordability gap, what they define in states as the growth of annual income versus the growth of housing prices, so that difference is the affordability gap. They found that the housing and urban development spending on these 18 different programs, that $460 billion was responsible for approximately 2.75% of the narrowing of the affordability gap, which is statistically insignificant. So that essentially means that all of that spending over the decade was statistically insignificant in closing that affordability gap and helping Americans afford housing.
So what all did Open the Books evaluate here? Are we talking about just, the median income and how much a new home is and how much they have to save? Go through that a little.
Yeah, so they looked at a lot of different things. They compared for each of the 50 states the median annual income and the median housing price. And so one of the things that they found, for instance, was that if a taxpayer is able to save 10% of pre-tax income per year, which, by the way, is about double what the U.S. Federal statistics believe that taxpayers are able to save. They found that they were able to save 10%, that they in the most affordable, or the state with the lowest affordability gap, the narrowest affordability gap, they'd have to save for 9.5 years. That state is Alaska. So in all other 49 other states, taxpayers have to save more than a decade in order to afford the typically priced home. In some states, that's as long as 25 years in Maine, for instance. So it really just kind of paints a dire picture. I mean, housing prices have all gone up 100% since 2015, at least, except for in Alaska, it's something around 98%. So it's not looking good right now for home buyers on the market.
Yeah, it's something that's considered the American dream. Everybody, is told that the American dream is get a house with a white picket fence, right? I mean, it seems that this report's highlighting it's a little bit more difficult, despite nearly $500 billion, $460 billion of tax funds spent on this to help with affordable housing. But as we're seeing here, Open the Books, they kind of show what some of the states with the highest affordability gaps are. Let's go through some of these really quick, Therese. Idaho is at number 1. You got Florida, Utah, Tennessee, Arizona, New Hampshire, Nevada, Maine, Rhode Island, Washington. That's just, the highest affordability gaps. What are some of the things that are driving this in those states?
So they can't definitively point to this exactly is what's driving it. One of the interesting things, as you can see from lists, is that the whole state breakdown doesn't really apply. But they are seeing in states like Idaho, for instance, that, there is that very large affordability gap. But at the same time, people's incomes are rising. They're just nearly as close as to the rate that home prices are also rising. And so it's not, so, they were surprised because they didn't find that necessarily states with high tax rates versus states with low tax rates, it would be more affordable in the low tax rates and less affordable in the high tax rates. That's not really true. I mean, Louisiana on that list has the lowest or the narrowest affordability gap. So prices or home prices went up, I believe it was about 50% roughly within the 10-year span, and incomes went up roughly around 40%. So not too bad. But But again, Idaho is also not really considered a blue state, and as you can see on that list, it's quite varied. You have everything from Tennessee to Rhode Island. Some of the stuff that they really can't pin it down to some things in particular. They said it's not just COVID flight. Can't quite be attributed to that because it's over a span of a decade. But they do see that this spending that states are doing that they're getting from HUD is not really making a dent. And so that's kind of like the main question right there is what is causing these super high prices and why is the spending not helping anything?
Yeah, $460 billion since 2015. States with the lowest affordability gaps. Louisiana has the lowest, followed by West Virginia, North Dakota, Mississippi, Alaska, Illinois, Maryland, Iowa, California, and Hawaii. Just to wrap up here, Therese, back to, kind of what you touched on at the beginning. Does Open the Books find that the $500 billion that was spent didn't make any difference?
No, it really didn't. And what Open the Books, I've talked with Christopher Neefus from Open the Books, and he was saying that solutions and funding at a more local level, or at the very least a state level, are probably going to be the best answer because those are the people who are on the ground, who know the local terrain. It's not just the federal government throwing money just willy-nilly and just constantly spending, and it's not really making a dent. And so they believe that that's kind of similar to the what the federal loans, federal student loans, how that's kind of, we've seen that how education prices have not gone down. It's just subsidizing things. And so Open the Books really believes that maybe distributing the spending and having this funding for affordable housing at the state and local level might be the answer to actually making a dent in that affordability gap.
Well, Therese Boudreau, people can read more of your story there at thecentersquare.com. So be sure to get that in your inbox with the newsletter for free at thecentersquare.com. We'll be right back with more from the States. Federal agents will be monitoring polling places in Florida and Wyoming as voters in both states head to the polls today. Also voting today are voters in Alaska and voters in U.S. Representative Eric Swalwell's former congressional district in California. Welcome back to the States. I'm Greg Bishop. The Center Square's Andrew Rice reports the U.S. Department of Justice announced it would be sending 4 Civil Rights Division attorneys to Miami-Dade County in Florida to monitor election activities. The department also said it sent 2 attorneys to Laramie County, Wyoming, to monitor activities there. Now, both counties hold large urban centers in each state. The Justice Department sent more than 75 election monitors across 5 states and 200 polling locations during the primary season thus far. Today, Florida primaries, they're looking to possibly shape control of Congress. Florida is one of 10 states across the country that's participated in rare mid-decade redistricting in order to favor a particular political party. Now, with a Republican trifecta in state leadership, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis pushed forward a map that would favor Republicans in Congress. Florida's new map has the possibility to flip 4 seats in the state currently held by Democratic members of Congress. Now, currently, the U.S. House of Representatives is split 217 to 212 in favor of the GOP. Also in Florida, U.S. Senator Ashley Moody was appointed by DeSantis to fill Marco Rubio's Senate seat when Rubio went on to the Trump administration until voters could elect a replacement during the midterm elections later on this year. Moody, though, is seeking the Republican nomination in Tuesday's primary for a chance to remain in the seat for the rest of Rubio's term. Now, voters in Florida also heading to the polls today to determine who's going to face in the replacing DeSantis in November. Candidates from both parties flocking to earn the partisan nominations and secure a seat for that governor's race, since DeSantis is term limited out. Now, U.S. Representative Byron Donalds, a Republican, is leading in the polls for Republicans. Donalds received an endorsement from President Donald Trump to fill the governor's mansion role. Now, in Alaska, an interesting story here, where the partisan markup for these races in U.S. Senate, it could be determined. Now, voters in Alaska, they head to the polls today to select candidates in their nonpartisan primary race. Now, incumbent U.S. Senator Dan S. Sullivan, seeking re-election in what's expected to be one of the most fiercely contested races in the country. He faces a slew of competitors. There's 16 candidates on the ballot from both parties, including prominent Democrat Mary Peltola. Now, Sullivan has drawn Republican competitors as well from many different backgrounds to challenge him in that race, including one candidate with his same name, Dan J. Sullivan. Now, Dan S. Sullivan alleged that Dan J. Sullivan, a former teacher, mounted his campaign in order to confuse voters at the ballot box Tuesday. The Alaska Supreme Court ruled that Dan J. Sullivan was allowed to stay on the ballot, but state and federal investigators have continued to examine the controversy. The federal investigation reportedly looking into whether there was a conspiracy hatched to deprive voters of a free and fair election process. And in California's 14th congressional district, voters heading to the ballot box today to choose the successor of former U.S. Representative Eric Swalwell. Swalwell resigned in April from Congress amid sexual misconduct allegations. He also quit the gubernatorial race. The two candidates on the ballot today are both Democrats, State Senator Aisha Wahab of Howard and former Dublin Mayor Melissa Hernandez, who sits today on the Bay Area Rapid Transit Board. Now, regardless of the outcome in that race, Wahab and Hernandez will square off again in the November 3rd general election to determine who will serve that term starting January 3rd. Now, in election-related news, election law changes in North Carolina, known as House Bill 958, vetoed by first-term Democratic Governor Josh Stein late Monday. The Center Square managing editor Alan Wooten reports the proposal would change early in voting processes for voting for primaries, primary runoffs, and special elections to 10 days rather than 17 days. The bill also requires the use of federal databases and information from other states to help remove deceased voters from the voter rolls. And the state's auditor's office, it would conduct post-election audits of county election systems at least once every 6 years. Here's the governor from Monday.
So rather than to make your life better, they want to make it harder for you to hold them accountable for their failures. But we are here today because we can stop this anti-voter law. Here's what's wrong with the bill. They make it harder to vote early. They're slicing a full week off of early voting in the primary. About 200,000 North Carolinians voted in the first week of early voting this year. And if you vote early in the general elections, this bill makes it easier for partisan officials to throw out your vote for up to 3 days after the election is over.
Now, for primaries in North Carolina, state law says any voter requesting an absentee ballot shall have one mailed for their respective county board 50 days in advance. And according with state law, State Board of Elections does have the ability to shorten that to 45. For the general election, the window, 60 days, most of any state in the nation. Here's more from Stein.
Our right to vote is precious. It's the fundamental right that underpins every other right that we possess. That's why I will always protect you and your right to vote. And that's why I am vetoing this anti-voter law today. But I need you. If you value your right to vote, call your representatives and tell them to uphold my veto.
Now, in a release, first-term Republican auditor Dave Bullock countered, saying that the governor incorrectly claims election administration has been politicized. He said election access in North Carolina has expanded this year. Voters have a greater number of early voting sites and more early voting hours for the March 2026 primary compared to the May 2022 primary election. You should be following along at thecentersquare.com, where you can get the newsletter for free. And we'll be back with more tomorrow here on The States to give you updates on all of these election stories and so much more. We'll be right back with more here on The States. Welcome back to The States. It's now time for America's Talking, with headlines from across the country that you can find in the description below or in your inbox with the Center Square newsletter, free at thecentersquare.com. National teacher unions, they contribute at least 10% of their annual budget to lobbying and political activism, which includes calling for the impeachment of Republican President Donald Trump in the 2026 American Federation of Teachers Handbook. Efforts also include supporting Democratic causes, such as messaging against immigration enforcement. The Center Square's Esther Wickham reports some teachers raise questions about whether union dues are being used to advance causes the instructors actually support. States like California are non-right-to-work states, meaning that they can require union participation and employees to pay agency fees or dues to a union. Right-to-work states like Texas, they offer union membership and dues as an option for workers. For public school teachers throughout the U.S., that all changed back in 2018 following the U.S. Supreme Court ruling in Janus v. AFSCME, which prohibited school districts from requiring their employees to pay union fees as a condition of employment. The ruling allows teachers throughout the nation to opt out of unions. Read the latest in that series from Esther at thecentersquare.com. At a campaign event in Lubbock, Texas, Governor Greg Abbott proposed tougher penalties for educators and school employees convicted of crimes against students, including a minimum 10-year prison sentence. Here's the Center Square's education reporter, Esther Wickham, with more.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott is proposing tougher penalties on teachers that have been convicted of a crime against a student, and even offering a minimum of 10 years in prison. This proposal would increase criminal penalties for individuals convicted of improper relationships with students to a minimum of 10 years in prison and requiring them to register as sex offenders. This would also prohibit them from being eligible for community service, deferred adjudication, parole, or mandatory supervision before the 10-year sentence is served. The Center Square previously reported a new misconduct tracker titled the Education Misconduct Reporting Portal, which allowed more transparency and accountability throughout the state of Texas to figure out where teachers were going after they had a report of some misconduct at a school, because it was found that some of the teachers would then leave that school district and go to another school district and continue those inappropriate misconducts. And so this kind of portal created more transparency and accountability. The portal was launched back in September of 2025 and has since then reported over 16,000 misconduct reports. And according to the Center Square, almost 80% of those reports have to do with the harm of a student. Now, the Texas Governor Abbott and many other lawmakers in the state of Texas hope that this initiative goes beyond the state of Texas and kind of impacts other school districts and other state lawmakers to protect and provide accountability for families and for students that have endured this heinous misconduct and inappropriate relations with supervisors, with teachers. And so Governor Abbott hopes to provide these tougher penalties to, quote, protect students and lock up predators.
And a member of the Georgia State Board of Education will lead a committee tasked with replacing members of the Dublin City School Board who were suspended by Governor Brian Kemp. Kemp issued an executive order suspending the board after a lengthy hearing last week that included testimony about the school's financial struggles. The Center Square Associate Editor Kim Jarrett tells us the State Board of Education recommended the suspension of the 7-member board in a unanimous vote. Now, the board is required by law to hold a hearing when a school or school system is a step away from losing its accreditation and make a recommendation to the governor. Now, a nonprofit that evaluates schools for accreditation listed the Dublin City School Board as accredited with conditions, and that was given to the school board back in April. Now, the Dublin City school system, it has 2,300 students. And that's just some of what America is talking about. You can get these and other headlines at thecentersquare.com. From my studios in Central Illinois, I'm Greg Bishop. Join us back here Wednesday for more stories impacting you, the taxpayer, from around the country, only with the states, powered by the Center Square.